Hello, my name is Marcus Collier from the School of Natural Sciences here in Trinity College Dublin, and I'm also the coordinator of the Connecting Nature Horizon 2020 project, which is looking at innovating with nature-based solutions in cities. What are nature-based solutions? The European Commission defines them as those solutions that are inspired and supported by nature, which are cost-effective, simultaneously providing environmental, social, and economic benefits to help build resilience. In other words, they provide co-benefits rather than just single use. They are deemed to be extremely beneficial for different types of ecologies in cities, and therefore the European Commission requires that nature-based solutions must have multiple benefits for biodiversity, and if they do not improve biodiversity or are not based on delivering a range of ecosystem services in our cities, they cannot be called nature-based solutions. They are a counterpoint to the technology-based solutions, where they see nature as a form of technology that both does a job in terms of protecting buildings or creating areas of water attenuation, but at the same time providing other types of benefits to the wider urban community. I'm going to quickly talk about, or briefly talk about today, the different types of nature-based solutions, whether they're bioswales for attenuating water, or living structures such as roofs and walls, or indoor living structures, all of which will provide different types of benefits than the original job that they are designed to do. Now, we know that in our cities, there are a lot of what we call legacy nature-based solutions. These are our parks and our trees that have been around in cities for quite a long time. And in fact, many city makers have always included some form of green space or park in the design of our urban areas, largely as a result of a noticeable change in public health to do with things like, for example, the Industrial Revolution or previous pandemics. So city makers have always included or designed in parks, green spaces. Not always for everybody, I will say. They were sometimes quite private areas, and sometimes only the wealthy could afford to have green spaces in their gardens. But in general, many urban areas have public parks and trees that are there not just to occupy a bit of space or to provide recreation facilities, but also to improve the lives and livelihoods of their residents. But we've seen a change in recent years, increased apartment living, increased different communities coming to Europe who use green spaces in different ways, and a very strong and very recently focus on health and well-being of our urban green spaces. And so these legacy nature-based solutions could be described as socially prescribed nature-based solutions. We need them in order to have a high quality of life in an ever urbanizing society. But most of our designed or specifically generated nature-based solutions really started maybe about 20 to 25 years ago with the introduction of living roofs, and now we have living walls, rain gardens, and so on. The idea here is that we have a lot of resources in our cities that are not used, specifically our roofs and walls. So why not readapt them or pivot a little, if you wish, to allow these spaces to be used or to be used to create opportunities for biodiversity, for recreation, and for innovation. A good example of this is about 20 years ago, we introduced the Sedum roof. Sedum is more commonly known as stone crop. It's a plant, a succulent plant, rather like a little small cactus that grows on rocks and shingles and stone walls, hence the name. And it is very tolerant of the extreme heat, the extreme cold, and all the extreme dry and wet that you will get on roofs. So for many of the early green roofs or living roofs, they were predominantly this species or this variety of plant, which did a certain job. They keep the heat in, they will keep the heat out as well if it's too warm, and they will absorb a lot of moisture, a lot of energy, and keep the building and the environment around the building nice and cool, without having to go to the great expense of air conditioning and so on. They also have the added benefit of being soft on the eyes, and therefore people working in those buildings with the view of these locations, especially very tall buildings, would tend to be slightly more productive in their work. But sedum roofs really are, with one species, one single species, if you have a disease, for example, it will wipe out the entire roof, or and it doesn't necessarily offer a huge biodiversity opportunity here, but it does have a certain amount in it. So what we're doing today around Europe is we're looking at multiple types of roofs. And here's an example of one that we constructed as part of the London Olympics. This is a roof where we've combined roofing technologies of solar panels and biodiversity roofs. So this is a roof that is exactly the same as the roof you saw previous in terms of the substrate, the area of soil that's below it, but it is providing multiple benefits. Not only is it generating electricity, which of course is another form of sustainable progress in our urban areas, but it also has a huge biodiversity value. So this is what we mean about a nature-based solution, one that can be compatible with the intricacies and difficulties of our urban design structures, but also offers the opportunity of increasing biodiversity. In this case, it's quite secluded, so it is actually a very well-used nesting site for different types of birds and insects. The nature-based solution technology moved on relatively quickly after roofs, and the technology became available to design and construct living walls that were adhered to the side of the building. Here's an example of a living wall on a hotel in London, and you can see on the image on the right with the thermal image that it is a very good insulator of the building. And in some cases, it's very good at keeping the heat into a building on a cold day, or keeping the heat out of a building on a cold day. And it provides multiple other benefits, large nesting opportunities. It's about the equivalent of a hectare of land, a field if you wish, of about 30 different species of plants growing on the side of a building. This living structure is also rain-fed, so in terms of its use of resources, it's very minimal. But it has offered the opportunity for different businesses to become active in innovating with nature-based solutions in terms of servicing them and designing these nature-based as living walls as nature-based solutions. And this has moved on quite rapidly to providing indoor living walls and living structures. Sometimes we see a variety of plants being used in a relatively simple situation where the walls, the plants are in planters cleverly anchored to walls with a very, very modest drip feeding and watering system. Would be very similar to having somebody come into your office once a week to water your plants. But this suits offices and apartments, and in fact, they have them on cruise liners now and other types of buildings where the floor space is very valuable. So surfaces that have large amounts of plants on them may not be possible because office space is so expensive. So having a living structure like that in your office or in your house is extremely beneficial to it's extremely useful for bringing green structures indoors. Since we've started to introduce living structures or nature-based solutions inside buildings, there's been a noticeable increase in research on the effects of plants on the atmosphere in an office, in terms of toxins and in terms of the atmosphere and the breathable air in offices, and things like worker productivity, innovation capacity, and even a lowering of illness days or sick days. So when I mentioned earlier on about the co-benefits, the multiple benefits of nature-based solutions, this is exactly what we're looking for. The way that we can use hitherto for unused or underused spaces, such as walls or roofs, in order to create the types of atmospheres we want in our offices. These are very appealing to have living structures in offices. And again, it has offered the service community ways of innovating with nature in order to bring this to a market. About 4 or 5 years ago, this was rather a rare thing, but now you can buy these structures, as you can see my colleague demonstrating, you can buy these structures in your regular DIY shops now. So they're available in the same way as at one stage solar panels were quite rare, and now they're very easy to get. So the nature-based solution technology has moved on in the last, let's say, 10 years in order to provide opportunities for every household and office owner to avail of their solution opportunities. And more commonly outdoors, we see nature-based solutions being used in this part of the world, to attenuate or to slow down extreme rainfall. These are sometimes referred to as rain gardens. They're not particularly attractive looking. They can be much more plant rich, but essentially they're doing a very basic job. They're holding the water running off buildings before it gets into the storm system, allowing that to sink or permeate down into the substructures of the street. And there, when it does overflow, when it does get to the stage where it can no longer get the capacity, the drains then take over. In other words, what this does is it slows the flow. It keeps the flow lower than the drainage system can take. And therefore, we don't get that level of sudden flooding that you can get when you get a very torrential downpour, which is, unfortunately, we're going to see an awful lot more of as a result of increased effects of climate change in our urban areas. But we don't have to have them as ordinary and plain as that. Here's some examples from London of different types of attenuation ponds that are used in exactly the same way. In this case, rather than letting them sink directly into the ground, they're holding them above the surface in order to provide different types of biodiversity opportunities in housing estates, in urban areas, and quite close to the residence of people. In many cases, some of these ponds or these attenuating ponds are associated with playgrounds. So this has a double purpose, because in a storm situation, it's unlikely that the playground will be used, and so therefore the playground is itself attenuating and sinking additional water, rather like any field would do. But also it is bringing biodiversity and the benefits of biodiversity closer to children, and therefore provides, for example, education opportunities. So the co-benefits here go well beyond the retaining of water from runoff roofs. It goes right the way through to how we can use these systems in order to increase education opportunities and to enlighten and inspire people from an artistic, or even in some cases, and I've heard this mentioned a few times, somewhat more spiritual viewpoint. And finally, we have the opportunity with nature-based solutions to design and to do very, very strange and unusual things with nature in cities that wouldn't necessarily normally be used. Here's an example, and it's in the cover slide at the beginning of this process, this presentation. This is an example of an outdoor living wall, which in this case, we're using it in one of our projects, the Tourist project, which preceded the Connecting Nature project. We're using it as an example of what a nature-based solution can be when you cannot dig down into the ground. So it is rather similar to a construction or like a Lego type of situation, where you can have all of your plants, their substrate, their pipes built into a block, and you can create it into any shape or dimension that you like, and create your living structure outdoors. Most of these are not dealing with rain. This is really focusing on dealing with extreme heat in cities. And the example we have here that you can see construction of on the left-hand side of this image is a prototype nature-based solution, which has the ability of lowering the extreme temperature of the air around it, providing biodiversity opportunities. There's, in that particular one, there's about 85 species of plants, including herbs and edible plants. And this has provided us with an opportunity for designing multiple types of shelters outdoors, such as bus shelters or bicycle shelters, shelters for supermarket trolleys in car parks, for example, or even hoarding around buildings. So this could be used in order to provide much greater benefits in an urban area than would have been thought of in the past. So I use this as an example of how nature-based solutions aren't just a tokenistic bringing nature alive into a city. They actually have the possibility of generating innovation in of themselves, of creating businesses for both the construction and servicing of these nature-based solutions, and also for providing opportunities for our urban citizens to learn more about nature, to reconnect with nature, and to bring themselves closer to nature, especially in many cities where we don't have it so much in Ireland, but in many cities where there is very little opportunity even for growing trees because streets are so narrow, they're so congested, and perhaps the underground area has got a lot of pipes or subways, or even a lot of archaeology and other things that we don't want damaged. So having a standalone nature-based solution, and as you can see, we're touring it around to show how it will work, will greatly benefit those communities, plus also give an idea for different communities of what a nature-based solution might look like, so that they can demand or create or even co-create their nature-based solution in their locality. There's a lot of issues to look at nature-based solutions. We still need to look at how effective they are, and we need to monitor them, remembering that they're really relatively recently introduced in our urban areas. So the overall effects of them will be, I suppose, take some time for us to measure exactly how effective they are, how well they impact. And it'd be very difficult for us to create programs and ways of mainstreaming it into the current urban planning process. Most planners will be aware of the extreme benefits of green infrastructure and deriving the maximum co-benefits from our green structures, but there's still a lot of work to do with different industries in order to make nature-based solutions a more mainstream impact. When it comes to sustainable development goals, we're still not fully integrating them into nature-based solution thinking. And when it comes to incorporating nature-based solutions into our different departments in our urban areas, it's very difficult to have a harmony of thought when it comes to that. So parks departments will maybe understand it, but maybe less so designing and engineering departments. So I suppose significant work needs to be done on increasing the skills and the diversity of knowledge in different urban departments, but also in the hearts and minds of householders and businesses who are also can be responsible for incorporating nature-based solutions in our cities. There are plenty, in fact, there's quite a lot of opportunities and a lot of funding for opportunities for co-creating nature-based solutions in our cities. A lot of our banks and our other institutions are looking at new ways of financing how we can do this. And if you want to know more about nature-based solutions, and you want to know more about the different types of innovations that can occur with nature-based solutions, please feel free to go to our website in connectingnbs.eu, or contact any of the team members you'll see on our website.